Mala Lawrence. Indeed, an interesting week it has been where President Bola Tinubu was in South Africa for the swearing-in of President Cyril. And of course, let's begin by telling you that at this edition, that the 5th President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, has been sworn in for his second term in office. President Bola Tinubu was one of the more than 18 heads of state that witnessed the inauguration. And of course, talking about that with me in the studio, we'll be looking at all of the things that happened in South Africa, is of course the Executive Secretary of the Anti-Corruption Network. I'm talking about Ebenezer Oyetaki. It's good to have you, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My pleasure.
Oh, yes.
Thank you for having me.
Exactly. If you look at some of the things that have happened over this course of this week, one of the major points, of course, is the swearing-in of the second term of President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. And if you look at what President Bola Tinubu has been doing, he's been trying his best to ensure to put Nigeria on the global space. How would you rate this in terms of what President Tinubu is trying to do?
Very well. The visit of the president to South Africa is very important because I remember vividly, long before now, while South Africa was still under the apartheid regime, people like Nelson Mandela, they were looking forward to Nigeria, a Nigeria that will become a beacon of hope, a bulwark of liberty to the African continent. The importance of South Africa and Nigeria being one of the largest economies in Africa in terms of GDP, the importance of promoting bilateral relationship within those two countries, as well as other African nations, with Nigeria leading the front, cannot be overemphasized. It is within that context that we can domicile the presence of President Bola Tinubu in the swearing-in of Mr. Ramaphosa. Now, also, you can also remember that the President of South Africa paid a visit to him in his hotel. That underscores the importance, the attributes to the role Nigeria has to play in torchlighting the front of African development and constructive engagement.
You know, let's talk about that visit, because after the swearing-in, of course, the both presidents were met, and of course it was a bilateral relations that was actually discussed. If you look at it, looking at how Nigeria and South Africa has been doing over the years, and how African, for example, the African trade has been doing over the years. What do you think these two men should be looking at in a larger space where you have over 53 countries who can do business with each other? But that is not really happening. If I have to get to Rwanda, I have to get, South Africa, for example, I have to get a visa. How do we begin to navigate all of this to having an Africa where it's beyond borders?
Yeah, that is a very good question. And over time, I think more than a decade, I have been working towards the promotions of intra-African trade. I also led the front of negotiations for intra-Africa and Arab states trades, because about 75% of Arab people lives in the continent of Africa, and Egypt being the largest country in Arab world and the rest of it. It is very important that Africans should deal with themselves in terms of comparative advantages in areas of productivity. If Nigeria knows where South Africa is better than us, we exploit it to our advantage. Okay. And if South Africa knows where Nigeria is having a productive advantage, they also exploit it. Vis-a-vis, we do this all over Africa. We trade among ourselves, building our own internal market as a shock absorber to the flux in international trade and the rest of it. And I think that is the way to go. I have also had opportunity of gathering some African ambassadors and spoke to them about this necessity. It is the way to go if we must create an emancipated Africa that the people like Nelson Mandela had been envisioning that Nigeria will lead its front of engagement.
So there's also the part, where the government also needs to play. Now President Tinubu is saying that, let's come down to Nigeria. President Tinubu is telling Nigerians, the citizens, endure for a while. The prosperity will come, our policies will work. But the people on the other side, you're not seeing what the government is doing in terms of trying to, if you say endure, what are you doing? What are you doing on your own part to also endure, to also say we should endure? So there is no balance. Some say there's no balance on the side of government. How do you think we need to do this? And what's your take on that specifically?
The first thing I would have expected this government to do after taking some courageous step like ending the subsidy, which has inflicted much hardship on Nigeria, the first thing I expected them to do is a drastic and revolutionary cut in the cost of governance. Till tomorrow, Nigeria is still running one of the most costliest governance systems in the world, whereby you have a country like the United States with over 20 trillion GDP. The senator's take home is relatively about $75,000 per annum. And here in Nigeria, both from the emolument and all of them put together, a senator is receiving approximately 2,132,000. Why not exit the 2 million and leave them with 132,000 when we know that we are operating a miserable GDP of 450 billion? Until we are able to focus on nation building, engage in productivity that will promote the value of Nigeria economy to over 1 trillion. That is one thing that made me to vote for President Bola Tinubu. I listened to him saying that within some period of times, I will develop Nigeria economy to, even through agriculture, to overtake the 1 trillion mark. Brazil, that started with us, they are parading the same populations with us relatively. Their economy is over 1 trillion and raising towards 2 trillion and that kind of a thing. So Nigerians have no reasons to be in the kind of hardship they are experiencing today. Russia has been prosecuting war for the past 3 years. Russia's economy just overtook both Japan and Germany to become the fourth world largest in the terms of what you call it, purchasing power parity. Even
Israel is fighting war and their economy is booming.
So what is our explanation? We should engage the land. I was listening to the Ghanaian president. He went to this peace initiative conference in Switzerland, and he was saying that because of the invasions of of Ukraine by Russia, that African continent is suffering the most because food cost and the rest of it. Then I was ashamed of African leaders and things of that nature.
Okay, so
we should do the right thing.
Yes, and it is very important that the government do the right thing. If Russia and Israel were fighting war, their economy is still booming. There's a lot to call for.
Exactly.
Indeed. Well, on the last note, this issue of minimum wage cannot be overemphasized. Many have been saying, okay, they need to put a peg on this. It's been a discussion that has been long for over a year. Labour and the government is now looking like Labour and government are, they are just in a room. Nobody is ready to open the door and say, okay, we have finally settled. But with the present economic realities, then let me just ask you, what is an ideal minimum wage in your own opinion?
I laughed. Look at this book, Nigeria, a Giant in Search of Her Destiny. This is my work. Now, you see, nation building is not magic. It can never come through prayers. We cannot be operating in a nation that will raise people's hope and will repudiate the hope. Which those in government, until they put themselves in the shoes of the common people, we will be having the kind of, misnavigations economically that we have been experiencing. What I am saying is that when Nigerians were collecting 5,000 minimum wage, and it moved from there up to 30,000 minimum wage, which some governors could not even pay until now that we started another agitation for minimum wage. At the time of 30,000 minimum wage, you can buy a bag of rice for 15,000 naira. You can buy a bag of rice for 8,000 naira, 10,000 naira. But today you can buy a bag of rice for 85,000 naira. That man who wants to buy a bag of rice for 85,000 naira has school fees to pay, have children to feed, have wives, and that kind of a thing. So when you put all of this together, our government, the people in government should not be behaving like a ghost, as if they don't patronize the same market with the people. But our economy may not be able to finance the demand of labor. 450,000 megawatt, what do you call it? 450,000 naira minimum wage, or even if you bring it to 100 or 200, many governors will cry they cannot pay because we have not been able to create the big cake that can absorb this. What we should focus on is developing the economy. I also have issues with Nigerian Labour Congress and the labor unions in the areas of their methodology of agitations. You saw that a country and a market potentials of over 220 million people is being powered by miserable 5,000 megawatts of electricity. Labour do not protest over 15 years ago, over 20 years ago, that we need more than 25,000 to 40,000 to 50,000 megawatts. Labour should be able to protest about those things. Then you saw that the refineries, we are an oil-producing country, a large one for that matter. The entire refinery ran aground. Labour did not give governments incessantly behind that, look, if you don't get refineries to work and that kind of a thing, no more importation for so period. This is the way the Labour should go, because if you protest for increase in salary and the president even approved 200,000 today, the inflation will roll over the board.
Yes.
So we should not be engaging nation building in the context of gross misplacement of priorities.
Thank you very much. I can see the passion at which you're talking about all of this. It is very important that the Nigerian government and, of course, the Labour are able to put a peg on the national minimum wage. Thank you very much, Mr. Ebenezer Oyetake, of course, the Executive Secretary of the Anti-Corruption Network. Thank you very much. We'll now go to the report of the swearing in of the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa.
President Bola Tinubu attended this presidential inauguration not only as the leader of Africa's most populous country or the chairman of the Economic Community of West African States, but as the president of a country that played a significant role in liberating South Africa from the apartheid regime in June 1991, before the multiracial election in 1994. The Republic of South Africa returns to the Union Building for the inauguration of Cyril Ramaphosa for a second term in office.
So help me God.
The same place Nelson Mandela took the oath of office 30 years ago. The Rainbow Nation is also celebrating 3 decades of unbroken democracy.
Sincerely promise.
Winning re-election for Cyril Ramaphosa was not a walk in the park. The 71-year-old was re-elected by fellow MPs with 283 votes, seeing off a surprise challenge by Julius Malema, the firebrand leader of the radical left-wing Economic Freedom Fighters, whose candidacy gained 44 votes. Cyril Ramaphosa's party, the African National Congress, failed to secure a majority in parliament during last month's election. The ANC subsequently made a deal with its longtime rival, Democratic Alliance, and other parties to form a coalition government. President Ramaphosa admits that unless the government addresses deep inequalities, the country could become unstable.
In this moment, we must choose to move forward, to close the distances between South Africans and to build a more equal society, to translate the promise of our Constitution and the vision of the Freedom Charter into a reality for all.
The re-elected president of South Africa also acknowledged the voices and messages of his people through the ballots and says their will be done through greater dedication to democratic renewal for better social and economic gains.
The people of South Africa have stressed that they are impatient with political bickering and the endless blame game amongst politicians and political parties.
The inauguration was also a display of military might as the army rededicated themselves to protecting the nation and its democracy. For Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu, beyond traveling to Pretoria, he will also explore prospects and opportunities in strengthening trade ties and improving bilateral relations. Femi Akonde.
Now let's move